Welcome to the India Development Debate. I'm Nayantara Rai. The ongoing protests in the wake of the Citizenship Amendment Act, the NRC, have not only hit the daily lives and normalcy in most parts of the country, but it's also led to a huge economic cost. While administrations of several districts in Uttar Pradesh have served recovery notices on 130 people for alleged roles in violent anti-CA protests, asking them to pay up over 50 lakh rupees, what about the recovery of damages in other states? The centre, as well as other state governments, seem to have one first response to any protest or contentious issue, and we've been seeing this for a while: shut down the internet. It's become, it seems, like a standard operating procedure, which is why we are now also called the capital of shutdowns, the capital of internet shutdowns in the world. According to a report by Freedom House, India topped the list of shutdowns among 65 countries that were surveyed, with over 100 internet shutdowns in 2018. The reasons vary from public safety to national security. But is this the only way that India knows to curb violence? Is this the right way to curb violence? And today we're going to be discussing the economic impact of protests and rampant internet shutdowns. To discuss this, I'm being joined by Sanjay Kapoor, the former Bharti Airtel CEO, Nikhil Pava, the founder and editor and publisher of Medianama, and our very own in-house Maithili Buston-Math, consulting editor of ET Now. Maithili, I'm going to come to you first. It's scary when you read these reports how India is the capital for internet shutdown, and we've seen a lot of that in 2019 for several reasons. I'll talk to you today about the Citizenship Amendment Act, the kind of economic loss also it's caused, not just the taxpayers' money in burning public property, but how people couldn't get to work. It led to a loss of productivity. It's the festive season, so even consumption has had to take a backseat.
Well, yes, absolutely, Nayantara. Any kind of unrest, particularly unrest that is so widespread, is bound to have an economic cost. And unfortunately, as with all these things, it is always the poor, the daily laborer. His life and his earnings get affected the most. It is the unorganized sector, people who work in the unorganized sector, who get affected the most. So in fact, the human cost, in terms of the human economic cost, as I would put it, is much greater than the sheer numbers in terms of economic cost to be able to estimate. Frankly, it's very difficult to get any estimate. I was looking for whether we can have, there was any similar estimate of the economic loss of the Mandal riots, and I could find no such number at all, because frankly, as I said, it's very difficult. And you spoke about the cost of internet shutdown, and this is where I think the fact that we are not really the most well connected on the internet, and net connectivity is not that great, comes in fact to our advantage, quote unquote, because the internet shutdown frankly affects only the services sector, like the financial services sector, the relatively better off, the retail, all those who have access to the internet. And the sad reality is that the vast part of the country, the vast majority in this country, really does not have access to internet in order to do transactions, economic transactions. So there is a huge economic cost, social cost, but that's more in terms of human beings, the cost that is of the lower strata of society. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get a number, but it is also true that investor sentiment will get affected. People will get much more hesitant to invest in such a climate. So it's certainly not in anybody's interest, and government must speedily step in to ensure that peace will be restored and there will be no further violence, and there will be greater understanding between both the authorities and those who are protesting. In a democracy, everybody has a right to protest peacefully. But government must also step down and be willing to talk, lend a ear, and that's, I think, the only way we can go forward in a country that is as diverse as ours. Sorry, Nayantara, for that long answer.
No, that's okay, Maithili. Clearly, you also have strong views, like almost everybody in the country right now when it comes to this issue. I have to, though, ask you, you brought up Mandal and you couldn't find any data. That was also a time when we didn't have the internet, right? Today, we do have the internet, the power of data, and we're talking about huge economic losses. And, I'm not quoting any figures simply because when you go on the internet to find out, there are various reports that come out to this effect. Telecom companies are claiming 21,000 crore rupees is the loss. Maithili, my other question to you is this the right way to go? We did it in Kashmir for Article 370, but a different reason was cited then for the internet. Now when there are protests taking place, Section 144 being called, is this the right way to go? The internet shutdowns?
Well, it certainly is not the best way to go, but given the fact that social media very often is a cause for rumor mongering, and it's very difficult, in fact, to prevent this kind of spread of fear and rumor mongering, perhaps authorities have no choice but to do it, but this should always be a last resort. Because as I said, internet, social media, these are all here to stay. They are enablers. People should be able to express their opinions. At the same time, it is a fact that you have all kinds of rumor mongering. It is very easy for false news to spread like wildfire. We all know what the cost of social media has been, the kind of interference we saw in the case of the US, purported interference in the case of the US elections. So these are facts that the authority that have to keep in mind. But as I said, it should be the very, very last resort.
In fact, Maiti, please hang in there. I want to bring Nikhil Pava into this conversation. I know he has very strong views when it comes to internet shutdowns. Nikhil, we talk about how India is the capital of the world when it comes to internet shutdowns, and we've seen a lot of that in 2019. Maithili, they're making a case that it's not the best way, but what do you do when it comes to rumor mongering, when you're actually seeing rioting, you're seeing the images of those cars and buses being burnt?
So, look, Nayantara, historically, for example, if you look at Bangalore, where um, uh, post the Kaveri verdict, there were fears of rioting and Section 144 being imposed, but and also the internet being shut down there because that's what's happened typically. What the Bangalore police did was that it got online, used social media, it kept an eye on rumors, and it issued official statements. Now, also, if you look at the last year's internet shutdowns, you will find that the majority of the internet shutdowns have happened in BJP states. And, I think wherever the police, even in case of Delhi, where we had the first ever shutdowns recently, these are all coming from the Home Ministry or essentially where the police is in the BJP's control. On the economic front, I would say that this completely hampers life. People cannot do digital transactions. So what does this talk about cashless India and trying to promote UPI? This is going to turn people more towards cash. People can't pay their GST. So as governments become more and more digital, the impact of shutdowns increases. So, it's kind of hypocritical for the government to keep shutting it down. And many of these shutdowns are preemptive without there being any violence, even in case where there were peaceful protests. To prevent peaceful protests, there were instances where the internet was being shut down. We saw that in case of Mandi House. We saw that in case of the Lal Killa. So I would say that this is basically where police wants to prevent people from live streaming or sharing of videos of what's happening on ground. This is completely undemocratic, what's been happening in terms of the police activity and the internet shutdowns as well. This is also about trust, right? Because if the internet keeps getting shut down, people then don't trust the internet in terms of paying for things. They will keep more cash. They will prefer offline ways of making transactions. In many cases, I remember speaking with someone who said that they weren't property agents are struggling in some cities last year where the internet was shut down, where they couldn't file purchases online. So all sorts of registration, all sorts of government activity moving online. I don't think there's a case for the internet to be shut down. The police need to be proactive, and frankly, it's a governance failure. It's effectively a suspension of our fundamental rights, and that's basically a government acknowledging that it can't protect our fundamental rights without shutting the internet down or without suspending some rights. So it's a complete governance failure as far as I can see, and this has a huge impact on the economy.
Of course, there's a huge impact on the economy. That's exactly what we're discussing today, and that is the topic of India development debate. Let me go across to Sanjay Kapoor. Sanjay Kapoor, the COAI, says that over 2 crore rupees is lost every hour when you have a shutdown of the internet. That's obviously one obvious reason that you see the economic slowdown. This is also the peak season for tourism. This is when our hotels in Rajasthan and hot tourist centers is supposed to be completely full. It's the peak wedding season as well. That business has also taken a hit. Restaurant, like yesterday was Christmas. A lot of people who may have gone to dine out said, we don't want to be stuck in a traffic jam. You've seen the restaurateurs also up in arms. I want to discuss with you the economic impact and how you have seen it on ground.
Look, Naintara, we cannot deny that India is essentially a wireless internet economy, and bulk of the people who access internet in one form or the other access it through wireless internet. When you look at the economics behind this, there's a revenue side and there's a cost side. When you look at the revenue side, it is not the revenue alone of the telecom operators, but revenues of the adjacencies as well. So there are so many businesses that today are, conducting their activity purely based on access. And if that access is denied, then obviously those businesses and the losses that they incur in terms of revenues needs to be added on to this as well. And over and above this, we have to realize that when you shut internet today, it's not only the data that gets shut, actually, voice also gets shut to a large extent. We know the plight of indoor coverage for most of the operators in our country. And when it comes to indoor deficiency of coverage, we all resort to WhatsApp calls and internet calling. And the moment there's a dark and blackout over there, the calling also suffers equally. Now, let me get on to the cost impact of it. You see, whether a telecom operator is earning revenues or not, there are fixed costs that are associated with the company, and that the company has to suffer. Outside that, what happens is there is imperfect knowledge, and because of that imperfect knowledge, a lot of customers tend to start calling the call centers, which is a huge cost for any telecom operators because they don't know why the internet is not working. In fact, you raised a very fundamental issue. I was in Jaipur for a wedding just 2 days back, and even I had to call back the call center or my contact at my operator's end to figure out what happened. Is it because I'm a roamer that I'm getting impacted, or is there some other reason? So I'm saying, even with people who are knowledgeable, associated with the industry, we get baffled to say what happened. Can you imagine the plight of a normal customer? So obviously it impacts the whole ecosystem, and revenues and costs both get impacted. But more importantly, there are so many people in the country today who live their lives. They have virtual offices. They don't even have offices. They conduct their lives around internet and wireless internet in particular while they're on the move. Imagine, that all gets impacted. So, it is unfortunate that, we have to face these situations in the country, especially a country which is so dependent on wireless internet as an access mechanism to live our daily lives.
And I want to come back to Nikhil Pawar, Sanjay Kapoor. They're, of course, making a lot of valid points, as were you. You were talking about how people could not pay GST. What if kids have to study for exams? All of that. E-commerce, it's shopping season, like I said, and, we're talking about a consumption slowdown. Things were just starting to pick up in the valley. And this is not the right image for India, that it's the capital of the internet shutdown. So my next question to you, Nikhil Pawar, is how can it not hamper foreign investment? How can it not dampen the investment climate?
Well, look, at this point in time, I really don't know why any investor is going to invest in India, because things look very, very volatile. The economy is on the way down, and doing something as drastic as this combination of CA and NRC at this point in time, which would effectively, it's a divisive policy that impacts the way India is viewed as a democracy worth investing in. It was a preferred destination outside of China. This impacts India's image globally, but it also, if the kind of uncertainty that gets created because of haphazard policy making. We've had a pretty crazy year and a half of internet policy making. You have the angel tax, you have the intermediary liability rules, you have the delay in getting the privacy law in place. So if someone has to invest in India, they don't want knee-jerk policy making or something that is necessarily disruptive. That's what happened with demonetization. That's what happened with the badly implemented GST. So what you're effectively seeing is that VCs, that large businesses, after Flipkart haven't gotten an exit, VCs will not be able to sell to larger companies going forward if they decide to reduce investment in India. Many of our policies are highly protectionist. including data localization moves. And again, that impacts the willingness of companies to invest in India. You look at what happened in case of e-commerce policy after Walmart bought Flipkart. Can you imagine what investors must be thinking? Because the policy effectively changed with in case of Pressnote
Okay.
2. So if this is going back to Vodafone.
You know, we don't have to go back that back.
You know?
If you just look at this shutdown,
No, but
if
I'm
you just
saying
look at this shutdown, Nikhil, and I want
how
to
that
bring this
impacted.
information out. This data that we've collected, online delivery apps like Zomato and Swiggy have seen a 10 to 20% dip. Grofers has had to reschedule 25,000 orders in areas like Lucknow and Guwahati. Oracle has seen a 15% drop in revenue during the year end. Microsoft witnessed a 9% dip in revenue. Cab owners have lost over 2,500 rupees every day. Sanjay Kapoor, you know, what about the Ola driver, the Uber driver, the Swiggy delivery man, the Zomato delivery man? None of us have been talking about them. On one side, you have the government saying, well, the jobs data is not a true picture because it's not capturing the apps and the startup ecosystem. And, you know, at the end of the day, we forget those guys.
Yeah, Nayantara, I think that's one of the major points that I was trying to make, that internet today and wireless internet in particular has gone beyond the realms of people who are wealthy and rich. It has really touched the lives of an average Indian. And whether he's a self-employed person or he works for somebody, his dependence on wireless internet has become quintessential part of him earning money. And therefore, you're right. Even if I'm a temporary labor somewhere, labor in the sense if I work for Swiggy or something on a contract basis, you know, I will get impacted because my effectiveness, my productivity will go down. So I think it is the productivity of the whole nation that actually goes down when there's a shutdown like this. And of course, it impacts the earning of people as well because their businesses don't do as well, and it will have an impact. You know, I really don't want to get into the nitty-gritties of what is the necessity to do it. I think the government has to take a call on that and why it is important. But I think now that we have chosen as a country that we are going to be dependent on our access on internet and digitization to conduct our businesses and live our lives, we must understand the ramifications of those not working and how colossal they have become. I think as you increase your dependence from physical infrastructure to virtual infrastructure, the ramification of that virtual infrastructure not working is huge and impacts the least common denominator in the marketplace.
That's certainly something to think about, you know, how we're going to deal with this. We can't, the government has to come out with yet another solution. How it's done, how it has to figure it out, it has to be done. You can't just keep shutting down the internet, because I think that is also leading to the student body becoming more angry. But even then, there's a huge economic cost to it as well. And that's what we've been able to establish on this edition of the India Development Debate. I'd like to thank all of my guests for taking the time out to join us here on this edition. With that, we're going to take a short commercial break.